Welcome to all of our ISM members, our chapter partners, and all of our guests to today's program and hosted by ISM New Jersey. Today's program will feature our guest panel who will be discussing best practices in global supply chain. Please be sure to ask your questions or post your comments in the chat or the Q&A box. If you would like to ask your question live, please raise your hand and then we will go over to you and then we'll give you permission to ask your question live. Everyone will receive a copy of the recording and continuing education hours, 1.5 hours later today. Our moderator for today's program is Tom Cook, CEO and Managing Director at Blue Tiger International. At this time, I'd like to turn the program over to Tom.
Thank you very much, Kathy, and appreciate the ability to put the program together. And we always look forward to working with you and your organization. And I give you kudos because it's these type of programs that I think are very important. So Blue Tiger International are supply chain management consultants. I've spoken at a number of the webinars in the last few years for your organization. So I know you're somewhat familiar with what we do. We basically try to help companies manage their supply chains, particularly those with a global footprint, and we focus in the area of cost and risk. So today's presentation is really about the best practices of the global supply chain, and I'm going to give a short presentation kind of framing the issues, but I have a panel of real serious 25 plus year seasoned veterans to offer their advice and counsel. I'm going to do it through a question and answer type discussion. What we'd like to do is to make it interactive so that if anybody has a question, you're welcome to unmute yourself and then just, ask the question. And we obviously, the more that we interface, it'll make it more interesting for everything. We've allowed for more than an hour, as much as an hour and a half for the subject matter, because there's a lot of things to cover here. So, we're trying to do this for all your benefit. So the more you interact with us, ask questions, feel free, and anything to do with supply chain, more than happy to answer it. So we have three panelists. We have Kelly Raia from Blue Tiger International, Joseph Mantello from Qosina Corporation, and Jason Manganaro from Sparx Logistics. So just very briefly, if you could start with Kelly and then go to you, Jason, and then you, Joe, just do a brief introduction, your background and your experience.
Hello, everyone. I am Kelly Raia. I definitely have 25 plus years in the international arena. I am the Chief Operating Officer for Blue Tiger. I'm also a licensed customs broker, and I'm looking forward to hearing what my colleagues have to say as far as the best practices and challenges. That's certainly been a very challenging couple of years. Anyway, thank you for attending today.
And Jason?
Great. Thank you, Tom, and thanks to the ISM for having me today. My name is Jason Manganaro. I'm the Vice President of Commercial Technology for the Americas for Sparx Logistics. Sparx is a third-party logistics company based in Hong Kong, typical freight forwarding and brokerage services, along with some advanced technology and asset owning services that we've just added in the last couple of years. Been in the industry since 2000, so actually a little less than 25 years. But looking forward to a good discussion and fielding any questions that come our way.
Right. Thank you, Jason. And Joseph? Okay. I don't see Joe here. So Kathy, I'm just saying, do you see? Oh, you're here. Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry. I had the mute on. Well, sorry about that. All right. Well, good afternoon to everybody here. And thanks to you, Tom, and thanks for ISM for having us. And thanks to the 42 participants that showed up here today. Hopefully you can all take something worthwhile home with you. I myself, Joe Mantello, I'm the Global Director of Logistics for Qosina Corporation. We're a Long Island-based medical component importer and exporter. We maintain distribution centers in New York and Milan, Italy. I myself have been in the business for 28 years, licensed customs broker for 26 of those. And we're happy to be here again, and we look forward to some good lively discussion.
Great. So again, just open the conversation up. As anybody has any questions, feel free to jump in and do it. The panel is made up of a company that's involved in consulting. They also do outsourced compliance and account management services for international business. We have a principal company that's involved in overseas manufacturing and distribution in the medical products arena. And then we have a service provider who's also involved as a carrier through their NVOCC capability in handling goods, both import and export worldwide. But they have a very defined focus in China, which obviously everybody's fully aware is one of our major suppliers, and also was a huge factor relative to the disruption of the supply chain that many companies felt over the last few years. So I thought what I would do is to kind of just frame a lot of the issues that we can relative to this whole subject matter. So I'm just going to go through a number of slides just to kind of set the stage for the conversation. You can't be thinking about what your strategy is going to be for 2023 and beyond without having a consciousness of the problems that we've had almost now for 30 months with the significant delays in the whole manufacturing and supply chain sector, the increase in cost in moving goods from one point to another, and more importantly, the issue about uncertainty, particularly as it relates to demand planning and as it relates to all aspects of us trying to think through how we're going to handle the disruption and how we're going to plan out events for our company. Anybody who had supply chain responsibilities grew a lot more gray hairs in the last 3 years than ever before. So COVID was a dynamic event that started at the beginning of 2020 and is still lasting to this period in time. While most of us in the United States would take the position that COVID is well behind us, if you take a country like China, which obviously is a very important source for us for a lot of manufactured goods, raw materials, components, and so forth, they're still having pretty serious problems with COVID. And one of the consequences of that is the lockdowns that they're having, which actually is shutting down geographic areas where the manufacturing is closed down, distribution is closed down, the transportation infrastructure is closed down. So COVID is not behind them at this point in time, but it has a huge impact on all supply chains all over the world. We also have learned through this process of the last couple of years is that there has been no single cause of the problem, nor a single answer to the management of the problem. And while there is signs that the situation is subsiding, there are still lingering issues that we face in the delays and the costs that are involved. And most of us that are involved in supply chain are all conscious now that there's a big factor that's looming, which is the railroad strike, which they're obviously trying very hard, both with the President of the United States, and now he's kind of delegated that to Congress to see if they're going to pass some legislation to try to prevent the strike from happening. Always appreciate that the supply chain is made up of various aspects of how goods move from point A to point B. And a lot of goods that are imported and exported, and also goods that are moved domestically, move on the railroad system. So if the railroad system goes on strike, it's going to have a huge impact. Again, increasing the slowdown and the disruption, increasing costing, and also continuing the problem of uncertainty, particularly as it relates to planning. So one of the things that has hugely been impacted relative to supply chain is what we refer to as just-in-time inventory management. We take the position that for the most part, it doesn't exist anymore because most companies were just happy to get as much inventory as they possibly could get in. And JIT, just-in-time inventory, was really a bygone. Now, whether or not it actually comes back or not remains to be seen, but most companies have significantly increased their safety stocks. Okay, and when you increase your safety stock over what would be considered the perfect number, you really are in excess, and therefore you're not using the just-in-time inventory process. It impacts purchasing, supply chain, and it has a residual impact for customer service and business development, particularly in the international arena. The impacts went through all modes of transportation, all countries around the world, and in all business models. It didn't make a difference whether you were in the medical equipment field, you were in food products, you were in high-end machinery, you were in semiconductors, it didn't matter. Everybody was impacted to one extent or another. It took about 6 months for that to happen, but when the problem raised its ugly head in February of 2020, by the time we got into June, the whole world was ignited with the COVID problem. Internally within our corporations, it impacted senior management, purchasing, export sales and customer service, operations and manufacturing, and moved into having financial impact and legal impact in all operations. More specifically, it's impacted the concept of demand planning, how we go about managing our procurement responsibilities. It jeopardized the ability for resiliency and sustainability for companies, both in the short term and the long term. It impacted our ability to sell. If we didn't have inventory to sell, then that's not going to go very well. It impacted business development, particularly in the export arena, okay? Because not only was the problem still occurring overseas, but you also had the problem of the transportation infrastructure of actually moving goods out of the United States. It had a direct impact on margin, profitability, and growth, which is why senior management was heavily involved with it, okay? And we also have to recognize that the factor related to personnel working remotely also had a huge impact on the whole process of uncertainty and planning and functionality and the efficiency of companies that had so long worked where everybody was in the same space, now working remotely. And we know going forward that some companies have taken the position of bringing everybody back, and most companies have created some sorts of hybrid models where some people are taking so many days a week at home and so many days a week in the office. But we know forever going forward that that model of everybody having to work in the office has probably changed forever. So one of the things that we have to think about when we're strategizing and coming down with what should be our best practices in our organization is to understand that years ago, before COVID started, as a importer or an exporter or a domestic company in supply chain, if you were an executive and you needed to move something from A to B, you'd call up a trucking company, you'd call up a freight forwarder, a custom house broker, or a 3PL, and you say, here's what I got to do, and they'll handle every aspect of it. And you didn't have to pay that much attention to detail or how it happened. It got picked up and it ended up going or landed wherever it needed to be. But COVID changed that whole thing. And all of a sudden we had to worry about, well, what's the congestion at that port of exit? What's the congestion at that port of import? Are there enough chassis available? Are there enough trucks and trailers available? And how will I move it once I get it landed out of the port to a final destination or to an intermediate warehouse? Okay, so supply chain management all of a sudden had to pay attention to a significant amount more of detail than they ever had to pay attention to previously. And they had to connect all the dots in that supply chain, connecting all those things that typically would be outsourced to a freight forwarder or custom house broker. And it really brought a new meaning to being diligent in your supply chain responsibilities. So in forecasting, a couple of things we think about from a best practice standpoint is that we really learned how and need to manage our suppliers more vigorously. And we always make the recommendation of companies tiering their suppliers. And in that tier 1 supplier category, those suppliers had to be managed and vetted and handled much more vigorously than those in the tier 2 and 3 category. And in some cases, in tier 1 suppliers, you had to be involved with managing down the line to their tier 1 suppliers to make sure that they got the raw materials and components that they need for manufacturing. We saw a significant uptick in increased safety stock levels. And all of us are aware, if you're paying attention to the news media and business, that many of the retailers, the big box stores, have overstocked themselves through the beginning part of 2022, which is why the warehouses are at full capacity and why there are so many sales and turnoffs of the business trying to move that stock as quickly as they can. We went into a process that if you needed to order 90 days in advance to get your freight in, you had to add another 4 to 6 months to that time frame, and in some cycles as much as a year. And a lot of companies recognized the fact that they needed to increase their number of suppliers. And in some cases, companies recognized that they could directly ship to a customer. And the perfect example of that is a client that we had out in California, in which They were bringing goods in from various Asian markets into their distribution facility in Reno, Nevada. And they did nothing in that distribution facility other than just move it on to final customers at various places around the country. So the question we asked was, what value is it that you're bringing it into that facility? And they said, well, it's really just convenience. It's not necessarily value. And we said, well, think about the cost of that convenience. Why not do the sorting in Asia and have it being shipped directly to your customer? And the use of freight forwarders and 3PLs helps with that process. That's one of the reasons we have Jason on the call. Maybe he'll talk about that, the kinds of services that are available for companies to actually start to do their fulfillment of services at the origin points and not necessarily at the destination points. Planning, another big issue. Needing to manage a customer needs more vigorously. I mean, you got to be on top of with your customers and finding out exactly what their needs are. Plan on shipping 30 to 60 days in advance of the scheduled timeframes. Using overseas consolidation and distribution points, seeking freight options, negotiating with leverage. Really, that is basically reducing the costs that are involved. The cost can be outlined in this next slide of the landed cost model, okay? And what we're referring to here is identifying what all the costs are in this particular example of an import transaction, where you have the acquisition cost of the goods, the freight to move it from point A to point B, customs clearance charges, duties and tariffs, okay, inland freight, warehousing, and distribution. So the idea is, if those are the areas where you have cost, that means you also will have risk. And it's peeling back the onion in each one of these categories is where the opportunity will exist for you to be able to reduce cost and risk in the supply chain. Some of the things that we've come up with over the years, I can't spend that much time on each of these subjects because of the time, but creating foreign trade zones, which are economic areas outside of the U.S. economy, bonded warehouses, which work very similar to foreign trade zones. Tariff engineering is the specific manipulation of a product and changing its harmonized tariff number so you get a lower duty rate. Drawback is a program where if you imported something and you pay duties and taxes and it gets exported, your ability to go back to customs to get that money back. One of the questions I'm going to have for Joe Mantello is to talk a little bit about that, because I know his company has put together a drawback program. Domestic and foreign distribution and more robust and aggressive export sales. In actuality, over the last 3 years now, the U.S. has aggressively grown its export sales, mainly because the supply chains around the world have failed to some extent because COVID has been so impactful, leaving the door open for U.S. companies to really expand in foreign markets. So additional thoughts that we have that we want to just keep in mind here is the idea as follows. Just bear with me 1 second. One is developing resources. And one of the great benefits of ISM is ISM itself is a great resource. And Kathy has organized a number of experts and has these continuation of these webinars and the delivery of information going to companies all around the world, all around the New Jersey metropolitan area. That information is a tremendous resource. That companies recognize that quality over cost is one of the outcomes of COVID. Is that we were very happy to pay anything to get something from point A to point B. We were very happy to pay anything to get our inventory in, okay? And we tended to shift now to value the service capability well over the cost capability. We looked at strategically assessing our sourcing, specifically China, and we see more and more companies every day not necessarily eliminating China, but reducing their footprint in China. We see what's referred to as friendly shoring, which is going to move some of the business that might be in China to more friendlier countries, such as Vietnam, such as Malaysia, such as South Korea, Taiwan, and so forth, and even closer to home, Mexico and Canada. And lastly is near sourcing, which also ties into actually bringing back certain aspects of manufacturing back to the United States. I mentioned earlier about foreign trade zones. One of the benefits of foreign trade zones is foreign trade zones allows companies to bring back manufacturing to the United States, but still take the advantage of imports coming in from various countries around the world. We also recognize the importance of better contingency planning. The idea is we were hit pretty hard by the factor of COVID, and companies now are preparing, well, what could possibly happen next that we need to potentially prepare for in advance. Focusing on assessing our vulnerabilities. That's been a big issue that's come out of COVID. And lastly, what I referred to as establishing what we call a risk management strategy in our supply chain is becoming much more increasingly important, which really is assessing where there's that vulnerability, where there's that risk, and how can we meet that challenge successfully and still run our business economically. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is to move on to the questions to the panel. I'm going to start off with you, Kelly, and I know that your organization helps companies reduce risk and spend in their import and export operations. And I know that you have lots of solutions and everything gets customized to specific clients, but what would you outline as maybe 3 top areas of success in providing counsel and guidance to companies?
I think one of the most important aspects of, thinking about the best practices in the global supply chain, especially with the challenges that have come about, is that never lose sight that compliance still matters. So I just want to kind of throw that out there. So I think that streamlining processes and the ability to explain processes has been something that I think is particularly of, I don't know, it's something that I consider an area of success, because we run into clients who are doing things and they said, well, why am I processing this import document? Or why is somebody asking me this ECCN question? And one of the I think the ability to explain that and have everyone truly understand, well, why is it? Why am I doing this? Because if it's a wasted process, let's remove it. And if it's not, then let's continue it, but let's understand what we're doing. But one of the things that we like to do, Tom, is do a deep dive assessment into someone's supply chain. And again, I'm looking at it from a compliance area, but looking at, what possible risks do we have in that supply chain, and kind of picking that apart. The past year has been very challenging, I think, for many of us, because the regulations not only changed, if we look at the war in Ukraine and the sanctions that went into place against Russia, and now we're, hey, how can we still send goods to Russia? Can we not send goods to Russia? What are we going to do here? I think that aspect's been very challenging because those regulations were constantly changing, right? And adapting to that. So I know some companies have taken the position that they will not export it all to Russia or to Belarus, and that's a decision the company may make, but trying to help those companies that are trying to continue to do business there, what they needed to do. So that was a particular risk that we were able to help a number of different companies with. And in some instances, we even applied for export licenses, right? It was a real change as a compliance person to see harmonized tariff numbers in the EAR, the Export Administration Regulations, as to what we can and can't ship somewhere. So I think the other thing I would mention, Tom, is also, with the landed cost model that you spoke about a few minutes ago, that having companies kind of really pull apart that landed cost model. And I think that a lot of the freight issues, which I know Jason and probably Joe can reference as well, obviously there were extreme freight costs. And so could we even have a landed cost model for a while there? But reevaluating what that landed cost model looks like now as prices start to kind of come back down and mellow out.
Right. So Kelly, you mentioned about Russia. Hasn't the government also come down hard on export activity to China as well on certain commodities?
Yes. I mean, China has always been a country of concern for the Bureau of Industry and Security and the Department of State, but which they continue to tighten, or the government continues to tighten those restrictions to China as well. Also, the concern of diversion still remains there, right? Of goods being diverted even to Russia, and as well as to China that may be controlled for export. At the end of the day, the right move is to analyze that transaction, look to see, does this require an export license, and apply for an export license. They do issue export licenses for China, so you may be able to move that item and export to China. Although I'll say on the Russia side, there is a policy of denial. So we have submitted 2 export licenses actually for specific products that were controlled under that HTS number in Part 746, and those were both denied. So you can always ask. Be compliant, ask.
Thank you, Kelly. So I've got a question for you, Joe. I know that your company, and I mentioned it earlier on, put together a drawback program. Can you explain, what it is and what the benefits are to your company in going down this path?
Sure thing, but I think I'm going to precede that answer with a pre-apology of the noise behind me. We're in the middle of building a clean room here in our warehouse, which I'm overseeing, so little background noise, and for my camera being out of focus. And if any of you ever saw me in person, you'd actually thank me that the camera was out of focus. So that comes at no charge. Back to the question. Yes, drawback program. If any of our 40 or so odd participants are an importer and subsequent exporter of goods, it's imperative that you have some type of duty reclamation program in place. Now, of course, there's lots of dependence upon that, depending on what kind of duty you all pay for the types of commodities that you import. Your record keeping ability, your IT ability to keep track of things like that, and just the overall value of the goods that you bring in. So lots of dependence. But the core benefit there is, if you ever did ask your accountant, how much are we spending on duties? And then take all of that and say, okay, well, how much of those goods did we actually export? You might, the figure might be staggering to you, and it's all right there for the taking to get that money back. How a drawback program actually works is it's a lot simpler than you might think. When you pay $100 duty on a box coming in from China, and then you subsequently export that box to Germany, you send a message to U.S. Customs and you get 99%. They keep 1%. You get 99% or $99 in this case of the money you spent on duties back again. And it's as simple as that. It's a huge money savings program. There are other ways to do it, but drawback does have its advantages. One thing you could do with drawback is, if you launched a program today, you could actually go back 5 years. As long as you've got the records to support it all, you could actually go back 5 years and do a one-time reclamation of all the duties that you paid on goods that were subsequently exported. So there's the benefit with that. It's a big money saver. Yep.
Great. So Joe, in your company's case, to do that, you had to go obviously up the line to senior management to get their buy-in. That was done pretty easily, or you had some challenge with that?
Well, it always comes down to the brass tacks. If you do a fair analysis, an accurate analysis, you don't want to over promise the amount of revenue that can be reclaimed from that. If you do a fair analysis and you explain the amount of work that's involved, not only of your own hours that you're going to spend at your desk, but other departments, IT, your IT departments that are going to have to get pulled in to pull a lot of these records, and you present it to senior management or ownership with a cost and a benefit. Again, depending on the value of your imports and the amount of duties that you pay against that value, most of the time, I think the green light is given. Right.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. So Jason, I'll start out with a question for you, and it's a pretty general question, but I think it's a good starting point. Is that as a service provider, 3PL, forwarder, broker, those primary services that you offer, how can you be supportive of a client in assisting them in reducing risk and cost in their supply chain?
Yeah. So the first thing that comes to mind in, people who decide to go with service providers rather than working directly with carriers, is the flexibility. When you're working with a service provider, you have access to multiple options, multiple carriers, multiple levels of service. And I think that going back to what you mentioned about COVID, Tom, I think that was part of the challenge for a lot of companies that had a very limited number of providers or options that they were working with. They found that they needed to kind of expand that circle, right, and have more options and more ways to spread out their transportation, their freight needs, so that they could get the support that they needed when it became much more difficult to find options. So I think by their nature, service providers, have that flexibility built in. Most companies are like ours. They're not beholden to any one carrier or any one group, so they can kind of make sure that they're looking at all options in the market. Another big one I would say is on the service provider side. I think there's a lot more investment in technology, just by our nature. It's a very big differentiator, I would say, on the service provider side, to compete with usually much larger companies that are the base carriers. You need to provide a higher level of customer service responsiveness and technology tools to really make the whole experience more efficient, more customizable, things like that I don't think are necessarily available outside of this segment of the industry. And then I guess building on that innovation, I would say that we're always, a service provider is only kind of as good as the experience that they're delivering to customers. So you have to be innovative, you have to be creative, you have to be very responsive to market needs and challenges that customers are facing, and be very nimble in that way. And I think, again, that's a differentiator that service providers can bring to the table that might be a little bit different than what you see from base carriers.
Right. So this kind of off of this subject here is that, the pricing of freight coming out of Asia dramatically went through the roof over the last 3 years.
Sure.
I always use the reference point that back in January of 2020, you could move a 40-foot container from let's say China to the west coast of Los Angeles for less than $2,000. And by November of 2021, it could cost as much as $25,000 to move that same container, depending upon lots of circumstances. So the pricing went up as much as 10 times, plus all the other costs that are involved, drayage, and inland trucking and everything. All those prices went up and so forth. So where do you see that today? Where is that now relative to where we were?
So rates, especially on the ocean side, have come down dramatically on most lanes. There's still a few that remain, I would say, inflated over what they were previously. The European market is one that comes to mind, but in general, rates have come back. I wouldn't say completely to where they were prior to COVID, but they're getting pretty close. It's pretty dramatic in the last several months how that supply and demand kind of mechanism has taken over. And as you mentioned it earlier, Tom, a lot of companies bulked up on product earlier in the year, kind of out of concern for having a very disruptive or challenging peak season. And as a result, we never really had what I would call a true peak season where rates and market demand were out of sync with what was available in terms of capacity. So rates have actually come down pretty dramatically the last few months, and they are actually kind of again, not down to the rock bottom levels they maybe were prior to the beginning of 2000, but they are kind of more in that sub 2000 West Coast, sub 5,000 West Coast range again. And they seem to be stabilizing at this point. I don't think we've seen a lot of further decreases in the last several weeks, but There may be a little bit as we go into the end of the year, but Chinese New Year is early next year. It's, I believe, the 26th of January. And that usually drives a little bit of an uptick in shipping demands. And, with factories shutting down, there starts to be a big push to get things out. So usually that's a time when rates may spike a little bit. But I think in general, we're probably past the worst of those extreme increases that you mentioned.
So Jason, before COVID, many companies that had regular volumes of freight would establish a contract either directly with a steamship line or with a freight forwarder using their NVOCC, their non-vessel operating common carrier contracts.
Sure.
And so through COVID, the carriers and those NVOCCs didn't honor those pricing because the marketplace was changing so dramatically and so quickly that they said, yeah, if you're going to force us to honor it, you may be able to move your freight 6 months from now, but if you want to move it now, here's what the cost is going to be. So they backdoored the pricing. So now the spot market seems to be dominating versus contract market. So where do you see for people who are on this call, thinking out strategy for 2023? Should they continue to be in that spot market of just getting pricing on a daily and weekly basis, or should they be now thinking about contracts?
Yeah, it's a great question, Tom. I mean, I think for sure the spot market has been the way to go for the last probably 2 quarters. I think that even companies that did sign for fixed pricing this year either had little in reserve or had agreements in place where only a certain percentage was going to move at fixed pricing, and then they were kind of committing a spot market rate for a certain level of that volume. I think that going into next year, what we expect is that the kind of script will flip to a degree. I think with the erosion of pricing, carriers will probably be more amenable to long-term pricing again next year. The traditional Trans-Pacific contract season starts on May 1st. But I would say even we have some carriers on the one side and then customers on the other that are interested in looking at fixed pricing even as early as January 1st. And I think what we've been looking at is quarterly fixed pricing as an option that could come into play as we go into the first half of the year, with the potential to get back to something more traditional in terms of, if not an annual price, a quarterly or a biannual type pricing structure where rates are being reviewed against the market, but you've got some cost certainty that comes back into the picture. But I will say that after the experience that most companies had, and with the extremities that happen with pricing, we've always advised some diversification in the way that you do your pricing. More than one carrier, a mix of contracted rates and spot rates, that this is even going back before COVID, just to have that flexibility in place and be able to kind of shift to whatever is most advantageous for your company. And I think that strategy is probably still pretty wise going into the planning for next year, to have some flexibility built into it.
Sure. And just another follow-up question in this line of discussion is, in the material that I read on a daily basis, it became obvious to me that a tremendous amount of companies in the past year shifted the imports. Instead of coming into the West Coast ports, moved it to the East Coast ports, and places like Savannah, Charleston, Norfolk, and New York all of a sudden had huge volumes that they hadn't had previously. And I read just last week that New York actually now has surpassed the volume that's in Long Beach and Los Angeles for the first time in like 25 years. So do you see that as more permanently now in place, that the East Coast ports are going to end up taking a much bigger share of the volume than the West Coast ports?
I think the factor that's still kind of looming over everything on the West Coast, or maybe the two factors with what's going on today, they're both labor related, right? The port labor situation, there's still not a labor contract in place for the West Coast longshoremen. They've been operating without a contract, and there's been, a few kind of slowdowns, disruptions that have happened. The main issue seems to be, really automation and replacement of manual labor with technology, and that's going to be a really tough nut to crack, I think, in terms of both sides feeling as if they get what they want out of that negotiation. So I think as long as there's that kind of looming danger of disruption, strikes, potential unforeseen cost and delay on the West Coast, there's always going to be this caution about really going heavy on the West Coast, maybe the way we've seen in past years. And then there's the rail labor situation, which I think, not that it would only affect the West Coast, but the traditional means of moving goods across the country is, if you're not close to a coastal area, you're probably going to bring it into the West Coast and move it by rail. And there's still this kind of unsettled rail labor situation as well that I, without having any figures in front of me, I would say would have a more dramatic effect on goods moving through the West Coast maybe than the East Coast, just because of the proximity of where companies tend to want their product. So, I would say that as long as those linger, we could see this trend continue. But I think, a big factor in it is always speed. You're always looking at a slower, and I'm thinking specifically about goods coming out of Asia, obviously, where, we have a large concentration of manufacturing. Speed of getting goods to the East Coast is always going to be a little bit longer than when you're bringing it into the West Coast. So I think that under ideal circumstances, people probably prefer to move a little more cheaply and a little more quickly into the West Coast. But again, these factors that are still lingering, I think, we'll continue to see the diversification of routing that we see now.
Thank you. Just as a reference point for everybody, I think it's a point of interest is that longshoremen, when they work the vessels, they have crews of about 32 men who operate the crane and are on board the ship, actually loading and unloading at the same time. So the Port of Long Beach put in an experiment 4 years ago where they took one of the finger piers that went out into the jetty to automate the whole process, because there's automation going on in Rotterdam and in Singapore pretty successfully. So that pilot program put 4 years ago reduces the number of 32 down to 5, meaning that they could load and unload a vessel through automation with 5 people, longshoremen, rather than 32. And that's the big issue that the longshoremen have, is that if they continue to automate, that they're basically, creating a circumstance where they're going to lose more than 2/3 of their workforce, right? So that's the issue when he references automation. Great. Okay, so Kelly, come back to you. So can you outline the importance of trade compliance management and global supply chain management, and what the consequences and benefits are in this area when they're not paid attention to?
Sure. Well, one of the benefits of being compliant is that you will not be bogged down in a customs audit or any sort of investigation where someone's looking to have information verified. Maybe it's the Census Bureau asking for information on your electronic export filings, right? So you don't get that's a benefit, right? That you just do your job and you don't have to worry about that stuff. But so let's go with the consequences first. Obviously, you can lose a lot of time if you have an issue with the government. But another issue is that you can have delays on the export side. You can have a delay if the government decides that your goods are going to be detained. We may have a shipment that's leaving today, and we make a mistake in filing our EEI, or perhaps we didn't screen the parties correctly. Well, when we transfer that information to Census, other government agencies are also receiving that information. So as a result, we could end up that when my box gets to JFK, that shipment is held up. So I have a customer issue to deal with, aside from a regulatory issue that I have to sort out. And in the event that I was found to have an issue, I could be subject to penalties, financial penalties from the government. But I think for exporters, one of the biggest issues is that exporting is a privilege, it's not a right. So in the event you did something really bad, really nasty, you can lose your export privileges. So that could be something that would really matter if you're very involved and heavily involved in export, aside from the customer delays and time issues. On the import side, same thing, right? On the import side, if we have bad documentation, well, bad documentation is going to mean that there's bad data being entered into the customs system by our customs brokers. And if we're not watching the harmonized numbers or something's off, we can run into an issue again where our cargo may be held up and delayed. So in addition to having cargo delays because of capacity, now we may be running into an issue with a customs clearance delay. And that, again, could subject to us to customs either taking a little bit longer to review the documentation, or customs even opening up our container or opening up the looking at the pallet when the goods come in, again, creating delays to get the goods into whether it's our manufacturing process or into our warehouse to satisfy customer requirements. So again, it's all focused around time. But the benefits of being compliant are that many times we will find that we may have been using an incorrect harmonized tariff number. That may be beneficial to us to use the correct tariff number, possibly bringing less duties into the picture. Also, I think that looking, Tom, at whether or not we have products that may qualify for free trade agreements. If we haven't taken a look at that, that is for the exporter, from the sales standpoint, that's a potential savings for our customers because they don't have to pay duties when the goods get to the foreign destination. And on the reverse side, same thing for us. It would lower our landed cost if we didn't have to pay duties on certain products, finished products, or materials that are coming in.
Great. So Kelly, I know that when you develop a best practices program for some of your clients, that the last year or so, you've introduced another major concern relative to forced labor. Can you speak about that for a moment?
Sure. So the forced labor regulations have actually been in place since 1930 under the Tariff Act of 1930. However, in the last few years, there has been much more emphasis on that, I think, as all companies in all countries are becoming more socially conscious, right? And more about a global social consciousness, that there are people who are working under awful working conditions, having their passports held so that they're unable to leave a country or leave a job, people who are not being paid. Obviously, there is, forced labor also in the side of, prison labor, convict labor, and much of this has come around from the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which CBP is now enforcing as of this past summer. And so that's become where, we have to do a deeper dive into the supply chain to understand where are our suppliers getting their products from. And CBP has taken the position that if there are materials or products that are coming in specifically from the Uyghur areas of China, with one of those defined areas, that those goods, is an assumption that those goods have been made with forced labor. And it's the onus is then on the importer that they have to prove that it's not. So how do we sit here thousands of miles away and demonstrate to customs that, yes, that supplier is not using forced labor? So we've been, using questionnaires, Tom, sending questionnaires out to foreign suppliers for our importer clients, trying to, ascertain whether or not there is forced labor. but also recognizing that, that forced labor does not exist only with China, that this is an issue globally, and it's being looked at in the global arena. Other countries are looking at it as well, not just us.
Great. Thanks, Kelly. So switching over to Joe, in supply chain management, many companies outsource much of the work to 3PLs, freight forwarders, and custom house brokers. What recommendations can you make in regard to vetting these companies and establishing a work environment where best practices are kept on the forefront?
Yeah, that's a great question. And if we've got 49 different participants, we could have 49 different shipping styles out there. So there's no one cookie cutter answer, of course. I think you probably all know. How you manage your transportation, your 3PL, your customs brokerage, all depends on your shipping characteristics. If you're primarily a package shipper or a package importer, an ocean freight, a commercial air freight will all dictate, what course you take on that. So I will speak at least from my current shipping characteristic. We're an LCL, which is a ocean consolidation, meaning ocean pallets and parcel shipper, right? We really don't do full container loads or that much commercial air freight. But still, having said that, a lot of these principles still apply. When looking at service providers, my first requirement is to forge good partnerships. Depending on how your company is structured, if you've got 6 different people in your logistics department, well, then you could afford to shop around and you can control the reins on every different aspects of your transportation a little bit better than somebody that's only got 2 people. You might only have yourself or a director and a coordinator or 2 coordinators. In that case, you have to form good partnerships with service providers that basically become an extension of your operation. You're dealing with the same people every single day, and they know your business, they know your characteristics, and it makes life a lot easier. One thing shouldn't be underestimated is the local rep. Who's handling your account? Is it a person that is hungry for the business, wants to succeed, wants to learn your business, wants to also forge that partnership? So it's a two-way street. You might want to forge a partnership, but if you're going with a company that either doesn't have local representation or may not be as hungry for business, well, it's going to be a constant struggle to forge that partnership that you're looking for. Excuse me. Not only the local rep, but how is your access to the senior management? When the local rep is not there that day or not anymore, or issues become very complex and very deep, and the consequences become more severe. Do you have access to their senior management where you can escalate issues and get things resolved with the priority they deserve? Get demos on their technology. See how it might integrate with yours, if at all. What their PO management system is like. So it enables you to have information on your imports and exports and document retrieval a little bit easier. It makes life and tracking shipments, of course. There are advantages of working with big and small freight forwarder customs brokers. Advantages and disadvantages. Some of the obvious advantages of working with the larger companies might be perceived advantages, I will say, is that you will think that a larger company has more offices and more people working for it, and they're moving a ton of freight, and their pricing has got to be much better since they're moving so much freight. Well, not always the case. Obviously, the market is what drives the pricing, primarily drives the pricing of the movement of freight. Larger companies might have better buy rates with ocean consolidations, but they're not going to leave money on the table when the market is calling for $100 per cubic meter. Well, they're not going to charge only 50 because they're paying 40. So there's the advantages of that and the disadvantages. And working for a small company, the old adage, you're a big fish in a little pond. You might get better representation, you might get a better service, but their capabilities might be limited. Another question you ask is, well, okay, your global network is how many actual offices do you own in all the major markets that I'm importing and exporting from? How many offices do you own, and how many agencies do you maintain? Not that agencies are a bad thing. Agencies can be good because there's also the hunger for them themselves to keep each other happy and provide a good service. But sometimes that can be a disconnect if they're not on the same computer platforms or anything else like that. So that's another question to ask. Overall responsiveness, communication, going back to that local rep or the local account manager, maybe not even the sales rep, but whatever account manager is assigned to your business. How is their responsiveness? How's their communication? How is their expertise to handle the more important issues? And it's a two-way street. It's not just them. They have to provide a service, but you have to tell them what you need. You have to communicate clearly to them via an SOP or via any kind of written communication. Guys, this is what I need. This is what this is how I want my freight handled. Sometimes just more importantly, this is how I want my customs brokerage handled. Here's a list of all the harmonized codes. I have done a list. I have done an analysis of all the items that we import, and we have assigned harmonized codes. This is how I want these goods imported. Because at the end of the day, if there is an issue, it's the importer's problem. It's not the customs broker that they hired. It's the importer's problem. So communicate, it's that two-way street. You communicate well to them, and they will deliver back a customized service of what you need. And if you were sitting there scratching your head, well, I have no idea what harmonized. Well, that's a service they also might be able to provide. A line item review, it's called, to say, okay, I've just stepped into this job. We've got 7,000 different SKUs. I have no idea what these are. There's a fee involved usually on that, but you say, okay, customs broker, here, do a line item review. A lot can be uncovered with that. There can be non-compliance issues that you're classifying things totally wrong. And that could be good or bad. You could be classifying something that carries a 20% duty, but you know what? An experienced customs broker will look into all the different databases and find past rulings where, you know what, that does fit, but this also does fit. Which is what something that Kelly said before about strategic classification. I forgot the word, Kelly. What is it? Engineering, tariff engineering.
Right. Tom actually mentioned the tariff engineering, right?
All right, there you go.
Right.
And there's no sinister or illegal overtone to that. It's classifying your goods the most accurate and most compliant way, but also with your best interest in mind. So that's another service they can handle.
So in what Joe mentioned about that, if a problem occurs, it becomes the importer's problem and not necessarily the broker's problem. So in the standards that customs works with, and most government agencies follow suit, which is that an importer and exporter have to exercise due diligence, reasonable care, and supervision and control in their supply chain. Okay, and it's a best practice. That means you have to establish SOPs and guidelines to make sure that you're exercising due diligence, reasonable care, and supervision and control. The subject of supervision and control comes back to what Joe was saying, is that the government recognizes that most principal importers and exporters are going to outsource certain responsibilities to a freight forwarder, a custom house broker, or a 3PL, but they still hold that principal importer or exporter responsible for managing or supervising and controlling that relationship. Okay, which means that for a best practice, there has to be guidelines established in that relationship to make sure that occurs. So it's a good point that's brought up. Now, Joe, you mentioned about PO management in your thing. So I'm going to throw a question to Jason. Jason, can you explain what a PO management system is and how that would add value and actually be a best practice in an import supply chain?
Sure, Tom. So when we talk about a PO management system, we usually talk about getting an electronic copy of your purchase order somehow, and incorporating it into the supply chain technology as early in the process as possible. So, this could be as easy as when you send the purchase order to your vendor to start, the manufacturing process, that a copy of that goes to your service provider. It could be an electronic feed of the information once the details have been finalized. But the value of having that PO management system in place is you can take information about the upcoming shipment from a PO number level, which would be your internal, way of kind of organizing the information. And then in most cases at the SKU or item number level as well. And start that kind of visibility process very early on in terms of the readiness of the goods against the expected ship date, the completeness of the order versus the PO that's been issued. You can automate a lot of the booking process where, in some cases, there are online tools for vendors to book against where they can basically book a shipment against the PO that's been assigned to them or POs that have been assigned to them. And the technology in place will help verify that the vendor is meeting the business rules of the client before the booking is approved. And rather than having to do a manual approval of that booking on the importer side, you can kind of have anything that's met the business rules be automatically approved, and only deal with the exceptions in that case. Once transportation starts, once goods leave, you have the ability to track again at the PO level or the SKU or item number level throughout the process. So you can kind of see what goods you have and what phases of the process, what's on order, what's been produced and maybe booked but not shipped yet, what's on the water or in the air, what's recently arrived, maybe hasn't been checked into inventory yet, and have kind of a big holistic view of where everything is in the process. And then there's some downstream benefits as well. We have some customers that extend that PO level visibility, not only to the delivery of their goods, but again, checking it into inventory, sometimes checking it out of inventory all the way to the final sales order that they issue, to be able to track that all the way back and reconcile it against the POs that have been issued. The compliance process, like Kelly was mentioning, that ability to kind of link your customs clearance and meeting of the customs regulations with the goods that have been ordered and shipped. And then also a big one that's happening, I think, especially now, but certainly was important during the kind of high rate level periods, is managing your free time exposure. Avoiding things like demurrage and per diem and weight charges and detention charges and unexpected expenses that go along with your shipments. When you have that kind of PO management system in place, you have visibility of all those things happening and the ability to anticipate issues and in most cases avoid or minimize the impact of extra cost when it comes up.
Great.
So that's kind of the end-to-end look at it.
Great. Switch to Kelly. Kelly, you talked a little bit about what the consequences are in compliance and so forth, and I thought you covered that very well. But can you share with us, without obviously identifying a name, but a case study where there were some severe consequences to a company that didn't follow the regulatory guidelines as a best practice in their supply chain?
Sure. So this is a little bit of a horror story. So buckle your seatbelts. But there was a customer that so many times we meet and engage with clients, it's usually after they have an issue. And this particular client was selling some items that would have required export licenses to where they needed to the final destination based on either the final destination and or the type of commodity that they had. Nothing that you would think of that would be really dangerous, I would say, but some, if you look at the Commerce Control List, there are items on there that are lower level that we wouldn't think are a big deal. So this particular company did have some sort of export violations, and There were several export compliance officers who proceeded to enter the building where they had the company was doing their shipping from and they're exporting from. And they actually arrested the owner of the company and marched him out in handcuffs because the person that they wanted to see wasn't there. He was out of the office. So that's kind of a little bit of a horror story, right? We don't like to tell our senior management that, hey, you may be marched out in handcuffs in front of all of your employees. So further consequences, well, obviously the fellow did get out of jail eventually, and he was released. And as the government was looking further into what was going on there, the company was not able to export. They had a temporary denial order in place where they were not allowed to export. As a result of that, the company had to use really a third party to do some exporting for them. Obviously, that would cut into their profit margin. And it was just a very embarrassing situation. If you were to look at the BIS website, they publish these cases. You can look at them a couple different ways. It's short summaries in the Don't Let This Happen to You book. They also publish on the website through the Freedom of Information Act. There's short summaries also of cases, but from time to time, we'll see if the Department of Justice, once the case has been resolved and the fines have been paid and everything, the whole violations are kind of, final, everything's finalized, you can read the whole case. I mean, it could be something where someone was shipping military items that ended up in Russia or China. So it's really interesting to look at those types of violations. But that one was pretty scary because I have not met too many people who have gone to prison or been arrested, certainly for export violations. But, I would say that if you have the position in your company where you're responsible for export compliance, if you knowingly violate export regulations, you have personal liability also. So it's something to think about.
In the case that you're talking about, Kelly, I think the words would be that the government was able to evidence that it wasn't a administrative mistake, that there was actually willful intent and egregiousness on the owner and the vice president of sales to avert export regulations to make the shipment happen, right?
Right, absolutely, absolutely. And from time to time, we will run into people asking, and it's interesting because you see the question kind of come as, so talk to me a little bit about this new regulation with Russia. Okay, we'll talk about the new regulation with Russia. Well, what if I were to send something to Germany and Germany sent it to here, and could it end up in this area? And when you start to get those questions, your spidey sense goes up and you start to get a little, I start to get a little bit concerned, as to what the person is really driving at here. So that's when we pull out the horror stories, and listen, I can't lead someone to the compliance fountain, but I can and make them drink, but I can bring them and say, listen, this is what you need to do, because you don't want to end up. I've with all that extra time and effort in managing violations and issues, I get very involved in that, and I see the toll it takes on people from a personal standpoint, because they know every day they're going to their desk that they have to get this audit done, finished for customs or for the BIS, and they know they have issues, and it's just a very stressful situation on the individual, but it also stresses out the company, because those valuable resources, right? The time is our most valuable resource during the day. That time is now going towards something that's not generating any financial benefit to the company.
Right. So Kelly, I know as a best practice, one of the things that you recommend for both importers and exporters is to enter the program called CTPAT, the Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism. Can you expand on that a little bit, please?
Sure. So following the events of 9/11, Customs implemented. And, Customs had always been under the Department of Treasury. Homeland Security was formed, so Customs and Border Protection now was part of Homeland Security, and Customs formed this program recognizing that the supply chain has vulnerabilities in it, and that the supply chain presented an avenue for bad actors, terrorists, to put something into the supply chain to move through legitimate cargo to create either an incident or to get something into the country that shouldn't be coming into the United States. So originally it was set up for importers only. It's been expanded to exporters. But basically, in order to participate in the CTPAT program, and since I think we have primarily importers and exporters here, I'll address it from that standpoint. But basically, we put together and Customs wants to see, how do the goods move from the point of origin overseas to the point of receipt here in the US? And how do you choose who your freight forwarders are, or your customs brokers? How do you find your foreign suppliers? How are you making sure there's not forced labor in your supply chain? When containers are loaded overseas, are they monitored to make certain that there's no debris getting in there that might bring in harmful pestilence into the US? I mean, it covers so many different areas, from selecting business partners, it covers USDA regulations, it covers now the forced labor issues. And also, your IT and your cybersecurity, which are all legitimate things we should be thinking about in business anyway. And for importers, the USDA issues and the forced labor, they're there whether you're a CTPAT member or not. So one of the benefits to participating in the CTPAT program is that you're assigned a supply chain security specialist who, if you're having issues with inspections or delays because of customs delays, not cargo delays, but they can help to intervene and kind of speak up for you and say, hey, this person's in the CTPAT program. Why are these goods taking so long, or much longer than they should? It's the same shipment all the time, and help be a liaison with the regulatory people. For exporters, it's a similar process. If you're an exporter, how do you screen your foreign customers, right? Well, most exporters are screening who their customers are. How are they selecting their service providers, et cetera. So it's kind of mirroring that import on the export side, flipping it around. But if you're a service provider, or if you're a airline, you're a freight forwarder, a customs broker, you have the ability to also join the program, but there are different requirements as to how you qualify, and also because you're managing a different part of the supply chain, that the questions and the things you need to do are a little bit different. Still have to focus on cybersecurity is huge for CBP, and hiring individuals, things like that.
So Kelly, the bottom line is, as a best practice, you would recommend that companies really consider becoming part of CTPAT.
Absolutely. It's not too often that Customs says, hey, we want to have a friendly, ongoing relationship with you, and it's a voluntary program. So there are other benefits to it too. You get to participate in certain meetings with Customs, attend certain conferences with Customs that you don't have access to, again, because they focus on supply chain, and maybe you'll find out about this information on the internet somewhere. But it's just a really good position to be in with Customs, to be in the CTPAT program. And in an audit, it's one of the questions that Customs asks: are you a member of the CTPAT program or not? That doesn't mean to say they're saying, hey, you should be in it, but really you should be considering it minimally.
Okay. Switching over to Jason, I'm sure that a lot of people on the call are thinking about what they're planning for 2023 and beyond. So in terms of companies trying to figure out what they should budget for their logistics costs in 2023, what comments or recommendations would you make?
Yeah, I guess building on what we talked about earlier, I would say it's probably prudent to assume that some of the reductions that have happened will be, still in place as we go into the new year. But I think that to assume, that rates will go back to the low levels they were before the pandemic is probably a little too risky at this point. I would say maybe to have something kind of in between as your target. But I do think it's fair to say that some stabilization of rates and normalization of kind of the fluctuations is underway right now. So that would be kind of my general advice without, throwing specific numbers out there, which I think is kind of hard for anyone to do at this stage.
One of the other areas, Jason, that we saw spike was warehousing, because of the fact is that in the United States, in January of 2020, about 70% of warehouse space was utilized in the United States. And as we enter December now of 2022, about 98 to 99% of warehouse space is consumed in the United States, therefore driving up or reducing the amount of space available and also increasing the costs. Can you comment on that at all? What you anticipating going to happen for 2023?
Sure. Yeah, I think we're starting to see that begin to level out. We talked about it even in your presentation as you led up to the issues that are out there. Tom, you mentioned that inventory levels are high. Just in time inventory has become kind of a thing of the past right now. So you've got a lot of goods being held. You've got in some cases still a lot of backup with getting goods into warehouses. They're at or over capacity. So you've got, full containers in some cases sitting on yards, on chassis, accruing extra charges, not able to get in. So I think, we have seen that on the West Coast, there's no more backlog of vessels, which is probably a good sign in terms of the flow of goods in. Still a little bit of backup on the East Coast. You mentioned that big shift that happened throughout the year of goods being, kind of reallocated to East Coast routings. But I think that, we're at a stage where there's definitely growth opportunity in the warehousing side. And I think that there is kind of some new warehouse capacity coming online. And I do think that with some of the supply and demand imbalance that's happening right now, the high inventory levels, some of that will start to sort itself out. But I do think that, that this trend of going away from just in time is kind of the question is, how long will that last? And if there'll be a shift back to a more, lower level of safety stock in a more dependence on rapid turn of goods, that could free up some more warehousing space. But I think in general, you can expect that, some of these things are here to stay in terms of the tightness of space, higher costs on warehousing. I don't think those are going to go away anytime soon.
Understood. What about domestic trucking just generally? What do you anticipate is going to happen there? Because relative to where ocean freight and air freight pricing is coming down every week, doesn't seem to be the same in the trucking market.
No, you're right. I think that the kind of underlying issue with trucking in general is that there's been kind of a shift in the workforce. There's a shortage of truckers in a lot of markets. People have left that industry for more stable situations. A lot of this is, I don't know that I have statistics to back this, but I've kind of, in terms of what you hear out in the market, there's been a lot of shift, from some of the long haul trucking and the more traditional commercial trucking to, more of the kind of Amazon delivery routes and things like that, where it's a little bit more of a stable work situation, a more defined route. You're home every night rather than on the road all the time type thing. The reality is that industry is just not attracting enough new labor at the rate that the demand is increasing for the need. So all this kind of boils down to exactly what you said, Tom. I think that even when the rate situations start to clear out, the fuel costs start to go down, I think you've still got a real driver shortage that's going to continue to affect trucking rates. And I think that that's probably not clearing up anytime soon. So I will say that the trucking increases haven't been as dramatic as what we've seen in some of the other modes, but it's been kind of a steady increase. But it's hard to see a decrease happening on that side in any kind of dramatic way. Again, things like fuel might, fluctuate. There might be a little bit of vying for, companies that are interested in opening up new business opportunities for themselves. But in general, I think we're going to see this slow creep in trucking continue on the domestic side.
Right. Great, good perspective. So technology is a huge issue involved in supply chain, and I am sure everybody on the call has an interface with technology to some extent. So, question for you, Joe, is I know that it's relatively important, and you brought it into your conversation a couple of times. So, can you just kind of elaborate on and how you manage this area and bring technology into your supply chain responsibilities?
Sure. Well, the advantages of a robust technology interface with your service providers can't be understated. And the more you can do with that, the better. The first, most foundational would be just the availability of information. If you have either a larger department, or if you just prefer to keep the control of it yourself, everybody's going to come to you for questions, for statuses of imports, for everything, and then you have to have a quick way of finding out answers. All right, so that's one thing where it just obviously can't be overstated, for you to be able to quickly pull up old documents or resolve problems, on imports or exports. Another major advantage, obviously, would be to integrate that with your system. Depending on what kind of ERP system that you have, most of the service providers' technology platforms, they're all based on only a few different base systems themselves, and they lend themselves to integration into companies' ERPs. All right, so the short explanation of that is to integrate as much of that technology into your ERP system, so that your purchasing manager or your export manager or your sales, anybody can go into your own system where they're familiar and go to look at one field and see that something is either delivered, or this is the ETA to your door or to the port, whatever key information that they might be looking for, without having to pull someone else in from the department. They get their answer quicker. It's real time, and just more efficiency. But obviously the quality of the information has to be good, and that's going to depend on the service providers platform themselves. And that's why it was I think it was number 2 when I had said of the criteria when picking a service provider partner.
Great. So the last question I'm going to ask is for you, Kelly. I know that in your assessments of lots of companies, a concept that your organization works with relative to reducing risk and cost is putting companies into foreign trade zones. So can you kind of embellish a little bit about what that is and what the benefits would be to a company to think about operating their supply chain and utilizing the benefits of an FTZ?
Absolutely. So when we think about that, one of the costs that we have involved, right, our landed cost model, are the duties and the customs clearance process. When we have imports come in, we pay duties to customs, and we also pay the merchandise processing fee to customs. When you have goods that are moving into a foreign trade zone, you defer those duties, right? And if we look at the MPF, the merchandise processing fee, on a typical, let's say we max it out and it's $540, whatever, we're deferring those monies. And so it offers us the ability to defer duties by moving goods from the port or from the airport, wherever they are, move them into a foreign trade zone. And the goods can sit there until we're ready to enter them into the commerce of the US, and customs clear them. And then at that time, we would pay the duties on the goods that we decide to move out. We don't have to move everything out at the same time. We can take it out as we need it. Or if we were to turn around and export the goods from the foreign trade zone, let's say they were finished goods or, you know, spare parts, and we export those overseas, we never pay the duties. We never pay the MPF on those products. So when Joe mentioned and spoke about the drawback, you don't have to do drawback because the goods never entered, you never paid customs in the first place. So foreign trade zones are available to companies to use them for storage. Also, they can be used to do actual manufacturing. So if you have a facility where you're actually doing assembly work or manufacturing, you can manufacture within the foreign trade zone. And then what you can do is when the goods actually are moved from the foreign trade zone into the US, you have an option of taking the duty rate of the lower items. So let's say you bring in a spare part that's, you know, at 3%, and the finished good comes in at 1%. Well, you have the option of saying, do I want to call it the 3% or the 1%? And you're allowed to do that. So it's a way of managing duties. And it's really a good tool to think about if that fits your company's model. And maybe some of you are saying, well, that sounds a lot like a bonded warehouse, right? Well, yeah, when goods come into the US, they go into a container freight station or they're in a bonded area at the port. But as we know, demurrage piles up if you don't clear them quickly enough. So you have an option also of moving goods into a bonded facility. But a bonded facility doesn't let you do stuff to the goods. So the goods basically stay there. You can recount them, you can do some repacking, but you really can't do anything to the products. And the other issue is that in a bonded warehouse, the goods can only stay there for 5 years. So it's a little bit more restrictive as to what you can do. But a foreign trade zone, you can actually either get yourself in with some sort of it could be a forwarder, it could be a warehouse that has that foreign trade zone option, or you can have your own facility deemed to be a foreign trade zone. So it's a tool to help manage that big piece of that landed cost, the duties and taxes.
Great. Okay, so with that, I'll open it up to the people listening in here. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to raise your hand. You can take yourself off mute and ask a question to myself or any of the panelists. And I also put up a slide here is the contact information for the panelists and myself if you want to reach out to any of us. So any questions? Do you see anything, Kathy?
No, I don't actually see any questions in the chat or Q&A or anybody raising their hand, but there was a lot of information, good conversation, such an important topic. So glad you were able to bring it to our ISM community.
Great. Everybody, thank you for your kind attention and happy holiday season. And don't be shy if you need any, have any questions or any guidance to any one of us on the call today.
Okay,
well.
thank you. Thank you so much. So again, thank you, Tom,
you.
Kelly, Joe, Jason, for bringing this important discussion to our audience today. And I'd like to thank all of our attendees for joining us today as well. So thank you very much. And everybody have a great afternoon.
You too. Thank you, Kathy.